So let's start. So Sweden has a very different model, but the model, and there's no lockdown. Large gatherings are banned, but restaurants and schools for younger children have stayed open. The government has urged social distancing, and Swedish people have largely complied. Although inside the Sweden's immigrant communities, they seem to be hit harder than others. Just in the United States, minority people in the United States, Blacks and Hispanics are hit a lot harder as well. And some of it is related to obesity, some is related to access to care. So I'm just going to read some statistics of what's going on today, which is broadcast prominently on CNN. So globally, there are 4,281,838 deaths, total cases, I'm sorry. There are 292,376 deaths, that's worldwide. United States, 1.4 million total cases and over 82,000 deaths. And I did some homework last night, and so in Sweden it says confirmed cases is 30,413, recovered 26,900, which is pretty good. Deaths are 1,564. But Denmark, which is near you, has 10,667 cases, 533 deaths. Norway has 8,158 confirmed cases and 229 deaths. So my first question is to you. You have this experiment where your kids, children are going to school. The elderly are at home in nursing homes, mostly. But public transportation is open. So, okay, so if you look at the difference between Switzerland and Denmark and Norway, which is kind of comparable, you're doing worse than them. And so a lot of people in the United States are saying this is because you're not having a strict lockdown. And so do you agree with that or not?
It's difficult to know, but the reason we have so high death numbers is because most of the people that died are over 70, and out of the people over 70 who has died, most of them are in nursing homes. About half of them, of the casualties, are people living in nursing homes, because that's our vulnerable spot. When it comes to society spread, we're not testing. We're testing our medical staff and people that are involved, but we don't test everyone. So I think the numbers of people infected and affected is too low. It's going to go up higher when we get a lot of testing done. So the spread is, I don't know if it's faster, probably, since our society is more open. But on the other hand, maybe when everybody else opens up, our numbers are going to be more similar to other countries around us.
Okay, so before I go on, I just want to say, if you have a question for Malin, please put it in the Q&A. There's a little box for that, and I will, read these questions in about 10 minutes or so. And okay, our participants keep going up, which is nice. So for people who just joined us, I'm David Levine. I'm co-chair of SWINey, Science Writers in New York. I'm talking to Malin Attefall, who is with Swedish TV. And I've met her at several conferences, and so I asked her to do this, and she said, okay. And then we put this on Facebook, and we got a lot of attacks, and so I wanted to say, she does not set public policy. She and I are both journalists. So we're just, kind of, saying, what the story is. So
one thing that I would like to say is that I think a lot of people, when it's come to this lockdown, people have this view that people in Sweden are not staying in their homes, which is wrong. A lot of people, we keep our social distance, I think, pretty much to the same extent as many countries who are in a lockdown that's been forced by the government. But for us, it's a voluntary lockdown. So you can see examples of Swedish people changing their behaviors voluntary instead. And when you look at, for example, the seasonal flu and also stomach flus that are common this time of year, the numbers have gone down almost completely, which shows that people are really keeping social distance. So when you have this idea that Sweden is not at all affected and we're not doing anything to stop the spread, that is a common misconception. It's a voluntary lockdown in a sense.
Okay, so you know, so the news media is showing photos of jammed restaurants. Is this true, or do restaurants have rules, or is it up to the restaurant?
Yeah, they have. They've been actually shaping up the rules a little bit. In the beginning, for us, when you finish high school, it's a big deal in Sweden, and they start celebrating that really early. So the students were out in the streets a lot, and a lot of the young people, since they're not that affected by the virus, and if they are, they get very mild symptoms, they didn't take that whole idea about social distancing that strict. So a lot of them were out in bars and restaurants, which are open. So the bars and restaurants had to have a little bit more strict regulations. They have to keep like every other table locked down, and you cannot stand by the bar. You have to sit by a table, and you have to keep social distance in the restaurant. And if you're not living up to that, the government closes your restaurant. So every weekend they go around checking out restaurants and closing a few of them every weekend, mostly in Stockholm and Gothenburg. I think the rest of Sweden is, it's a big city disease here in Sweden. So it's not at all the same kind of numbers in the smaller cities and in the rural areas.
What do they do about repeat offenders of people?
Well, since the lockdown is voluntary, you cannot be really an offender.
Okay. So if somebody decides to have 100 people over for a party, are the police going to come over and say, you can't? Well, there is a rule, right? It's 50 and under, correct?
Yeah, I have never heard of anyone, since I think maybe we're country kind of a base, we're used to having, to following the state in a sense. So I have never, since the spread started, I haven't heard of anyone trying to start any bigger parties than that.
Because
any parties at all, actually.
Countries in Europe, and you know, in France, up till Monday, you had to print out a government form. You could only go 10 kilometers from your house, and you had to say, I'm going to the drugstore, I'm going to the grocery store, I'm going for a daily walk. And if you were found 100 kilometers from your house, you got a fine of 1,500 euros. That was pretty effective. Because there are people, you know, not everyone is, so are people in Sweden more obedient than people in France?
I would say so, yeah. And when it's not working, for example, with the restaurants, it wasn't working. They were letting these students in anyway, and it was crowded. So they started closing down restaurants. So they sort of play by ear. As soon as something is not working, they kind of change it. But for example, I take the bus to work every morning, and I take the subway, the last part, and people are sort of splitting up and sitting in different parts of the train all by themselves. There's everybody's trying to keep their distance in a sense, and most people are trying to work from their homes. But for example, last night I was out at the restaurant celebrating my new series with a couple of colleagues, and it was not at all crowded in the restaurant, but it was some people there.
Okay, so if you walk around New York City, if you want to go into, I went to a grocery store yesterday, and there's a person not wearing a mask, and the clerk said, you have to wear a mask or leave. And that's the law in New York City. You have to wear a mask. I mean, that's just, you know, last, you know, a few weeks, masks are mandatory in these in drugstores. I mean, the grocery stores are behind, kind of like if you go to a bank, they're behind plastic shields. The drugstores behind plastic shields. There are lines of 6 feet apart, so you have to wait your turn. So is that okay? So you told me you don't wear a mask.
No, that is a difference. In the medical profession, if you're a medical doctor or a nurse, you wear a mask, and also if you're handling old people. but that is also voluntary. I was speaking to a friend of mine who is a medical doctor who said that that is one of the things that she thinks that the government is doing wrong, that she thinks it should be mandatory for the people taking care of elderly to wear face masks just in case. But it's sort of up to each nursing home to decide that. But the general idea from Public Health Agency of Sweden, who's kind of making the rules here, is that you should not wear a face mask because there's very little science that really says that it helps. It helps you from not infecting other people, sort of. It's not been that many studies about that either. But the general rule is that if you feel sick at all, if you have any kind of mild symptoms or anything, you should not go out. And the idea, I was listening to the press conference, and Anders Tegnell, who is like the big mind behind all these ideas, he said that if you put a face mask on, you sort of tell people that they can go out even if they're sick. You should not go out at all if you have any kind of symptoms. So he thought that it's better to just let people know that stay home. Face mask is a sort of false protection in a sense, he said.
Okay, so that's not the belief here. I mean, the belief here is that you should wear a mask, you should wear gloves. I mean, as you know, you've lived here. I mean, different states have different rules, but and then the White House came under. You know, the White House now has cases of coronavirus where Dr. Fauci is in quarantine, and I mean, and the original press conferences, everyone was saying next to each other. President Trump has never been seen in public wearing a mask. And Vice President Pence went to the Mayo Clinic and didn't wear a mask and got very widely criticized because it says you can't go into the hospital without wearing a mask. And so we're starting to see that a little bit, you know, especially with, you know, Vice President's press secretary got it, the 12 Secret Service people got it. So no one's immune. And it seems, you know, our top doctors are saying that they believe masks help. And certainly
the mask don't protect you, it protects people around you. So if you are actually sick and breathing or people are then it will help you not infecting other people. Maybe. It's very little science being done on this. It's something that we haven't looked into that much, but it could be that you help to stop the spread in that sense, but it doesn't protect you.
Okay, so if somebody wants a test in Sweden, can they get a test?
Yeah, the tests, I guess that's the same as everywhere else, that the tests are not very accurate yet. Well, at least not the antibody tests. But I know that we're getting some for my job as soon as they are, since it's considered to be one of the important things in society to have journalists. I think we're getting the tests rather soon, but it's not for everyone yet. They're kind of trying to figure out good way of testing right now. And I don't think they have solved that problems. We don't have that many tests, and so many people are affected anyway. So they're not testing just to know how many people are affected. It's just if you work for the elderly, then you should of course get tested, or if you're a nurse or something like that.
So if you go visit your mother, you don't wear a mask?
We don't go and visit our elderly. You're not allowed to visit anyone over 70.
Okay, and they have to stay home?
Yes, they have to stay home. I have a hard time keeping my dad to stay in his house because he thinks that he's such a good shape and he's 81. And he constantly leaves his house to go out walking and stuff. But that is something that our authorities really saying that please stay indoors if you're over 70.
And
you're not allowed to enter any nursing homes as a guest, only if you work there. And that was one of the things that the first thing they decided when this whole disease started, that you should not visit nursing homes as a guest.
Okay. So, you know, a lot of people have said that Sweden is doing experiments in herd immunity, and you disagree with this.
Yeah, first of all, herd immunity is a term. It's not like a strategy. The strategy in Sweden is to keep the spread slow, so the hospitals can remain open, and then we have intensive care places for everyone that needs it. So there is no, I've seen in American media that you have this idea that we're trying to get sick as soon as possible to infect as many people as possible to kind of create herd immunity. It's not that like that. The idea is to keep the infection spreading slowly.
So why don't you think your other neighbors are not adopting this? You know, why is Norway not Norway, Denmark? Why? I mean, Denmark is a half-hour trip from Malmo. I've taken the train.
I think that different countries have different authorities who decides, and ours is completely science-based. And when it comes to the schools, for example, I think the schools is one of the, I am not completely certain that the Swedish version is best in every sense. It could be a problem. Of course, there is a problem since we lost so many of our old ones. So this nursing homes, the whole thing about that has been a catastrophe here in Sweden. But one thing that I think we're doing right, and I think that a lot of people are, and a lot of countries might follow in that sense, is to keep the schools open. Because so far, there are no kids that are getting intensive care. They're not affected, and they're not considered to be the motor of the spread of the disease either. They get mild symptoms, and they're not very contagious. And for us in Sweden, since we have a different way of taking care of our children, we don't have any nannies, we don't have any au pairs, we don't have any private solutions at all. So if we close the schools, we're going to lose a lot of our medical staff. Since the medical staff are both men and women, they're saying something like about 30% of the staff would have to stay home to watch their kids if we close the schools. So by keeping the schools open, we are actually not making the disease worse, and we are keeping the medical workers in the hospitals. So I think that would have been successful. Other parts, not so successful.
Has there been any, since this started, has there been any changes in policy based on numbers or based on?
Yeah, first it was 500 people in one meeting, but they changed that rather soon to 50 because 500 is such a big number, so it didn't make any sense to have a number like that. So they changed that, and they also changed this part about the restaurants. And they're more and more strict about the nursing homes, but I think they were too slow. And in the beginning, I think we all believed that the people that brought the virus into the nursing home were the visitors, but it turned out that it was the staff. So they have gotten a lot more, they're paying more care to protective clothing for them and things like that.
Okay, so you talked about nannies and au pairs, but I imagine a lot of people who are staff people who are immigrants or poor people, they need to go to work. In the United States, people say people who are sick are going to work because we don't have the social support that you have.
Well, that is something that is a new rule here in Sweden. For us, if you're sick, you get paid to stay home by the state, no matter what kind of medical insurance you have. And usually you have 1 or 2 days without pay first, and then you start getting this money from the state. But now, since this disease started, since the virus started spreading, you get money from the first day. So as soon as you feel, well, you don't even have to be sick, you just have to report in sick, then you get money from the state from day one. So that is a new thing that has come with this disease. And
how long does it last, the pay?
How long does what?
How long does that? How long does the payment last?
Until you don't have any symptoms anymore.
Okay. So if a person says they're sick and they feel they have COVID, will they get tested before they go back to work?
No. You have to, the recommendation is that you should be 2 days without any symptoms before you go back.
Okay. But everyone is not, I mean, this is assuming that everyone is as astute as possible. So can people get thermometers? Is it hard, are there short, in the United States, it's hard to get a thermometer. it's hard to get a pulse reader. Are there any shortages like that going on?
I remember in the beginning it was even grocery stores. There was not enough food there, and everybody was sort of piling up in their homes. But the other day I was able to buy, what do you call it? The kind of liquor that you put on your hands to keep them sanitized. I got that from my dad the other day from the pharmacy, and they haven't seen that in the pharmacy for several weeks now. So I think things are getting back to normal.
Purell bottle.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is the biggest misconceptions about what Sweden is doing in the media that you see in the media?
Sometimes I have this feeling that people think that we're not caring, that this disease is not affecting us, that we don't care. And it's actually the other way around. It's since we're not forced to stay home, and most people are doing that anyway, if anything, that shows that we are actually paying much more attention to this than a lot of other people would do. It's just a different way of doing the same thing, I think. The society is looking sort of, except from the school part, I think it's more similar to the States than you think it is.
Okay. Well, but in the United States, people are told to wear masks.
Yeah, the mask part is too, but that is also, is it illegal not to wear a mask?
You can't go into a grocery, well, in New York State, each state, in New York State, you can't go into a grocery store. You can't go into a pharmacy without a mask. That's the.
I read, that's interesting because I read about a study that it's not an infectious disease study, but it's about how you care for elderly. And if you're not used to wearing a face mask, you might actually increase the risk when you're wearing one, since if you're not used to not touching your face, for example, when you have a face mask, you keep itching yourself maybe with a mask on. And if you have any virus on your hands, you will sort of put them in your face. So it could actually increase the risk of getting affected. It's one of the things that they said at one of the press briefings.
We had that argument early on, but then they changed it. And
yeah, but I do think that we should have gotten, of course, the nurses and all the caretakers at the elderly homes should wear face masks. Why not? So that's the rule we should have had, I think.
So you have a huge immigrant population. I know in Malmo anyway, there's a huge Muslim population, and other places. Are they being more affected by the virus?
A lot of, in the beginning, it was a lot of people from the Somali group who died. And then they thought maybe that's because they don't understand the information. The information is in Swedish maybe, and maybe they are not understanding it and not reading it. But it turned out that, yes, they are, but they are living much more densely populated areas. They are sharing apartments, big families and small apartments, and then it's much harder to keep the virus out, of course. So I think, of course, they are reading the information just like everybody else. But since they are living in so crowded housing, they are being heavily affected. Well,
in South Dakota, they had the highest percentage of cases in one little town where there was a meatpacking plant, which, all the workers were poor immigrants. They're working right next to each other. There's obviously no social distancing in a meatpacking plant. And they were all taking buses home together, and many of them lived together. And so it's not a shock at all that if you're living with, 10 people in an apartment, as opposed to 2 people, your odds go up.
Exactly. So that is, the poor people in Sweden are, of course, more affected since they live in smaller housing, I think. But well, nobody has the numbers yet, but I wouldn't be too surprised if when this is over, that maybe the social differences that you see in the States, where you have like people with bad health insurance more affected and things like that, since our medical treatments are free, maybe we will have a bit less of that difference seen. And also I think that since we get pay sick leave from day one, so maybe people actually can afford to stay home if they have even mild symptoms. but you don't know that yet. It's my guess.
Okay, so let's take some questions. Let's see. I'm just going to find this. Sorry. So here's one question. Is Sweden testing for COVID-19 infection in school children to try to see if there are carriers and sources of infection? This is a big question in the United States for our education system.
No, we're not testing children at all. The schools are business as usual. They are just going there. I have 3 children myself, and the one that goes to university and the one that goes to the later part of high schools are homeschooling. But my youngest one, who is in middle school, she's going to school as usual. One interesting part about that is that our school system is basically mostly state. So we have state schools, and my daughter is going to an international school with international teachers. And they are the only schools that have been closed because the teachers come from South Africa and America, and they follow their own country's regulations. So they don't believe it's safe to go to the school. So there were no teachers there. So they had to close that school.
Okay. Are your borders closed to people visiting?
Yeah, they are. And for me personally, since I was born by the Finnish border up in the north of Sweden, right now my brother is there, and it's a big change. It hasn't been closed since World War II. They have armed guards by the border to Finland, and you're not allowed to go over. And usually we just take our bikes and go out and go shopping in Finland. And now, and a lot of people work in Finland and live in Sweden and the other way around. And that has caused a lot of tension, and people are very upset about that, since usually in a lot of cases, people are living on one part of the border and working on the other. And also a lot of couples are breaking up, since you're not allowed to cross the border if you don't have a good reason, like for example, a work pass. But for social reasons, a lot of people have their parents in on one part of the border and staying on the other one themselves. And it's a very friendly border, and right now it's not, so that it heavily affects them.
So who is imposing who's imposing it? Is it Swedish government?
Finland.
Okay, so they don't want Swedes in.
Exactly. They closed the border.
If you're a Swede and have a Finnish boyfriend, you're not going to see him.
Exactly. If you're not, I heard about a person who was actually working on the Finnish side, and she had a pass so she could go to her work, but she could not shop for lunch on the Finnish part of the border. So she had to get her co-worker to go out and buy food for her, because she was not allowed to leave the office building.
How do they know? How does someone know if you just go for lunch?
I think that's when people are afraid, like they are in Sweden and in Finland and in the States, people are reporting each other. Okay. And have this permit and are allowed to enter Finland as an exception to the rule. And if you start breaking the rules, then probably you will lose the pass.
Okay. Someone wrote, I do not believe the characterization of the U.S. policy as letting as many people get it as possible is correct. I don't believe that's our policy. I don't believe you said that.
No, it was the other way around. I was saying that I have a feeling that Americans believe that Sweden is trying to go for herd immunity really quick, that we are trying to infect as many people as possible in a short time. And that is a misconception. I think nobody thinks that United States are trying to go for herd immunity.
Okay, so if Sweden proves this approach works better than the lockdown, what will this mean for the rest of the countries and the rest of the world?
I think already, since our death rate is so high, nobody can say that our version, the Swedish system, is working very well. We have lost so many of our old ones, and I think that's a big tragedy for our country. So something is not working with our method. I think the school part could be something that other countries might be interested in trying, but then you have to find a way to protect the elderly, since we failed.
Okay. Someone said, well, it's not a question, but said, for the audience, please see this May 5th New York Times. The speaker said Sweden is following signs that kids are less contagious. The studies are actually slowly finding that kids are just as contagious. They simply are not affected by the COVID less. So, I mean, I've been told I can't visit my children because they could give it to me, even though they don't have symptoms. So I guess this person is asking, okay, if you can get it from children, is it foolish to allow children to be in school?
I think that you kind of have to look at what's at stake. And for us, we need our medical staff. So they decided that it's more important to have the doctors go to work every day and to keep the kids home, since the kids are not the motor of the virus spread.
Okay, so here's another question. Okay, so are medical and dental practices functioning normally? In the United States, you can't get a colonoscopy unless it's an emergency. If I want to see my internist, I have to do it by telehealth. Same thing for, some doctors are seeing people on an emergency basis. For the most part, doctors' offices are closed. And is that going on in your country at all?
Yeah, it's similar, since we do need people that are doing other things as medical professionals usually are involved in this COVID crisis. So a lot of them that are involved in different kind of hospital areas usually are involved in the COVID crisis right now. So there's not that many other things going on. Of course, emergency things and things like that, but the whole medical system is affected. And also I know that there's a lot of telemedicine going on, so that you don't want to bring a lot of people out of their homes if it's not absolutely necessary, since we are actually practicing social distancing, even if it's voluntary. And why would you then want to bring your patients to you if it's possible to just keep them online instead?
Okay, someone said, it'd be interesting to hear your description of Sweden's perception of the way the crisis is being handled in the United States. So how do Swedish people view how we're handling it?
Okay, this is sort of not science-based at all, more like a personal reflection, but we find it very interesting to follow your president and to view, for example, when he was talking about how radiation could affect the virus, and also that you should kind of inject this, what is it called in English?
Bleach.
That's something that for us, that's so, our government officials are putting so much trust in the scientific community, and they are sort of making the public health authorities make all the decisions. They're getting a little bit criticized for that they don't have their own take at all, because everybody's so strongly focusing on, well, please let the scientists help us here. And in USA, sometimes it feels like you have sort of a different take on that. The president has his own ideas, and then he has medical professionals, of course, and he has like the staff or scientists with him, but he sort of has his own mind. And we find it very interesting to view those press conferences. It's been shown a lot on Swedish news.
Interesting is a very kind word, I think.
Him and Putin and Bolsonaro, those are the three people that you sometimes see on Swedish news, because they have sort of their own ideas. Even if the countries don't, I mean, American lockdown is sort of similar to all other countries. You have like a little bit more outspoken president in a sense.
Yeah, they don't show Putin very much. I have not seen a Putin press conference. I would like to see that. But I do understand that Putin said if you break the quarantine, you go to jail for 5 years. And,
oh, really? I didn't know that.
And I do.
In the beginning, they thought that it wasn't a big problem at all, and then they sort of changed it.
Yeah, they're in the top 10, but I do believe that Putin would put you in jail for 5 years. I have no question. Yeah.
What is the penalty if you break quarantine in the United States? Can you do you get a fine, or do you get put in jail, or how does it work?
They're giving people, I know that in Central Park in New York City, they're starting to give people warnings, and then they're also saying, and the police will say, if I come back and see you here with 20 people, I'm going to give you tickets. So there's been some criticism because it seems in some area, that of the tickets given out, like 90% were given to minorities. So but right now, police, just the police presence, I think is like, I'm in a very little park, but there's a police car and there are 4 policemen just standing there in front of the playground. No one's going there, so they don't have to ticket people. I mean, just they've shown that just having an empty police car on a highway without any policemen in it makes people slow down because they see a police car. People don't want to get tickets, but we don't have the fines that Europe has, but there are, but they're threatening to give fines to. They've had some funerals in Brooklyn with the Jewish community, and they've had churches where people are holding services no matter what. There's a private club people were playing tennis, doubles, and they all got pretty huge fines. And so, a fine kind of puts a good stop to behavior. I think it's not the worst thing to do. I don't agree with 5 years in jail, but I do agree with a fine, especially with a warning. After a warning, it's the same thing like if you slow down for speeding and they give you a warning, and the next time, there's discretion with the police, but a speeding ticket makes better drivers. They don't, I think.
But do you think that the Americans, if you didn't have this police looking after you, do you think that people would kind of don't care about the regulations and would not keep the social distance and would keep going out without their face masks and would completely break the whole idea of containing a disease?
I don't. I disagree because I think that, if you go to, you can't buy Purell anymore. The hand wash, we're out of it. Toilet paper is being hoarded. Printer ink is being hoarded because people think that's going to be a long time. So there are food shortages because so people are worried about that. And there's also, food going up. So I think people want this to be, people are very self-compliant, and people will go up to people and say, hey, you're not wearing a mask. Why not? There are joggers not wearing masks. Now, I know I was outside the other day and it was a hot day. And it was like, it's not easy to breathe through a mask. And I can't imagine running with a mask on. But one of my friends said, well, it makes you exercise harder. I said, I think it's going to give me a heart attack, so I disagree with that. But they're saying you can play singles in tennis, but each person has to bring their own set of balls and, and stuff. But, and there's also variations from state to state. You can't get a haircut, but I know that there are people who have a barber come to their house and they're paying a lot of money. I know someone who paid $100 for a haircut. Have the person come to their home and all that kind of stuff.
In Sweden, we do have their hairdressers are open if they want to. It's sort of up to them. But on the other hand, it's very difficult to cut hair without keeping the social distance. So I saw that a lot of hairdressers are actually cutting hair outdoors, which in Sweden is kind of a bad idea because it was snowing this morning, for example, in Stockholm. So it must be rather cold to cut hair in that kind of condition, but it's sort of voluntary, and people are actually trying their best to not spread the disease. I saw a question on the chat that said, are immigrant workers eligible for sick leave? And they are. Everybody is told to stay home from the first day of feeling sick, and everybody is getting money from the state to do so. It's a way, they're being very generous about that. You don't need any you don't have to prove that you're actually sick. So if you want to, you can sort of just stay home and say that you're sick, and that will be enough. It's 80% of your pay, but there's a limit to how much money you will get. So it's for people that wear low wages, the loss is less. So they are, I think, maybe a little bit more encouraged to stay home.
So
As well.
Not a question, but restaurants that have opened up in Colorado to in-person dining against the state orders have had their business licenses revoked. So so they're taking it seriously there.
Yeah. That's the similar thing that happens here. They closed last weekend. They closed 3 or 4 restaurants in Stockholm, and first they give them warnings and say, well, the tables are too close together, there are too many people in here, things like that. And if they don't obey, they close the restaurants. So they are very hard on that.
Okay. So someone asked a question: how has the pandemic affected your work as a journalist?
Well, for me personally, I have this big premiere coming up. So I was thinking that, and
Tell us about it. Tell us about the premiere. Tell us about your premiere.
So I did a reality show, sort of, together with scientists. So we had all kinds of testing being done in laboratories on regular people before they had an 8 weeks exercise period with coaches that were sort of telling them to do martial arts, running, yoga, and also to just move a little bit more in their everyday life. And we did the same thing after 8 weeks to see what happens with their bodies. And then we sort of looked at the science and said, well, what happened? And that show is not very important. It has nothing to do with the COVID. So I thought it would be canceled. And I was very worried about that, since we've been working with this for like almost a year. But it turns out that I have very good ratings now, because people are staying at home watching television. And a lot of people are sort of feeling that they should be exercising. So in a sense, it's been good for my ratings with the COVID. So it affected it sort of opposite than I thought. But I'm usually a medical reporter. So I write a lot about, well, I do the Nobel Prizes every year, and I do a lot of reporting about disease and infections, influenza, things like that. But since I've been so tied up in this new series, I haven't been able to help them much. And I feel kind of bad about that, because I think this should have been an important time to do more reporting, science-based reporting on the disease. There's so many rumors going around, people are worried, and it could have been important to sort of be a part of it a little bit more. So I'm going to do that now, because the premiere is over and I have some more time.
And is that going to be shown on American television?
No, I don't think so. I think on American television, it's usually mainly American shows, aren't they? How many foreign language speaking?
Well, British obviously, but there's a lot of Spanish stations and a lot of.
Of course, they feel free to buy it. I would be happy to have it on American television as well. But they all speak Swedish, and it's kind of a very Swedish show. But for more generally, as a journalist, I think that a lot of people have been involved in reporting about COVID and Corona. Since many people are sick, even people that don't usually report this kind of stuff are sort of involved in this whole thing. And we work from home as much as possible. We are, for example, we're not doing any live interviews. We are doing a lot of things on Skype. And we are, if we do go out to do interviews, we have really long microphones. I don't know if you have that in the States, it looks really silly. So you have like sticks carrying around to do the interviews. So it's, of course, affecting us. Okay.
Someone said, please know that plenty of people do not wear masks in public unless the store policy enforces it. Well, yeah, I'm sure that's true.
When my son came home he was in Arkansas this whole year, and I wanted to, when the coronavirus started spreading, I was very worried that he would get stuck in the United States, because the rumors in Sweden were that when you get the virus to the United States, it's going to go up in very high numbers very fast, since, well, from the beginning, it wasn't taken very seriously. So I was worried about him being stuck in the United States, not being able to leave. Eventually I got him to get on a plane and come to Sweden. And then he had to wear face masks the whole time. And I told him, just keep it on to make the Americans happy so they don't throw you off the plane. But as soon as you come to Stockholm, you can remove the face mask. Because I think he's the kind of person who would have a face mask on and who would keep scratching his face because he's just 16 years old. He doesn't understand how a face mask works. And then it's more of a hassle for him to wear it. And the risk for him personally increases if he wears a face mask.
Okay, so you know that several thousand scientists signed off on a letter protesting that this is going to be a disaster in Sweden, and these are not cranks. These are scientists saying that what you're doing is wrong. And what was the response to that? I mean, you haven't changed.
What in particular are they talking about? Is it the face masks, or is it? Because I think that the response in Sweden, that's what I keep coming back to, is pretty much the same as in the United States, but it's voluntary. One number that you might be interested in knowing is that, for example, Italy has much higher death rates than Sweden has. Italy has a forced lockdown. And if you compare that to vaccination, for example, vaccinations towards measles, then in Sweden, it's voluntary. You do not have to vaccinate your children. It's all up to you. 94% of Swedes choose to give the vaccinations to their children. In Italy, you have to do that by law, and they still have a lower number than us. For some reason, it seems like we're a very obedient country. We sort of want to do the right thing. And I think that the difference in how we are responding to the virus on a personal level is not that different.
Okay, so this
and it's the schools, but except from that, it's pretty much the same.
So in March, a letter came from Karolinska Institute, and 2,300 academics signed an open letter to the government urging implement stronger measures to protect the country's healthcare system from being overwhelmed. And this is from Cecilia Sonnenberg-Nackler, professor of microbiology, microbiopathogenesis. She said, we must establish control of the situation. We cannot handle a situation where we get complete chaos. No one has tried this route. So why should we test it first in Sweden without informed consent? Another person said, a feature of the strategy that has not worked very well is protecting vulnerable populations. It is evident that it has been detected in many, as we said, nursing care homes and hospital wards. So I don't think it's anything new.
But that, since we're talking about that specific letter, it was signed by 22 people that call themselves scientists. But when you look at, no, it's not. It's because I know who that person is from Karolinska Institute. They said that, for example, they were all saying that they were scientists and virologists, but when you look at the real titles, hardly any of them are doing any research in that field right now. The consensus among Swedish scientists are to back the Public Health Agency of Sweden and the policy here. I think most scientists, as everybody else, are very, very concerned about the elderly, but I read somewhere that 86% of the Swedish population is behind the Public Health Agency of Sweden, who's kind of deciding the rules here. And those scientists that wrote that letter, they had a few valuable points, I would say, but it was based on the wrong numbers. And they have been forced to withdraw that letter since they said, for example, that we have higher death rates than Italy, which is not true.
Okay, so here's a question I have. What's the downside of testing people who work in nursing homes?
We test everybody who works in nursing homes. It's just we don't have that many tests yet. Everybody who is involved in elderly, they test, of course. It's the tests are not very reliable yet. As soon as we have tests, we will test everyone. It's something they're working very hard with. We really believe in testing.
Okay. What would have to happen for you to, for the government to change their policy? I guess a great increase in death rates, or a big outbreak in a school, something like that. That might make sense.
I know that they were talking about closing down the schools in the beginning in case this would sort of prove to be, that the schools would prove to be a problem. But the school have been okay, the schools. I think that if anyone could come up with any way to stop the spread in the nursing homes, I think we'll go to any kind of measures to stop that. But they were the few areas that we did have stronger regulations about, and it still didn't work. And that's it. I think what's going to happen in Sweden after this whole disease is over, I think that there's going to be a lot of people looking into how was that possible? Why could we not protect our elderly? And I think the answer will be that we have to sort of make that job a bit more important in society's eyes, in a sense that we have to pay them more and we have to give them better opportunities to do a good job, to make sure that they have the right protection when you work with elderly, for example. I think most of us did not understand how vulnerable our old people were in this system, since so many of our elderly stay in nursing homes. I guess it's similar in many countries, but maybe the numbers are even higher in Sweden. And maybe the people that work in these highly affected areas are less protected too. That they have too low wages, for example. Too many people are so dependent on their everyday everyday salary, so that they go to work even if they're sick, because it was the staff who brought the virus to the elderly, not the visitors.
Well, maybe, you don't know. I mean,
everything seemed, they stopped the visitors very fast within the first week, but the spread kept going. It didn't help at all.
But in the United States, there have been elderly who have not gone out, not done anything, who are not in nursing homes, and they're still getting sick. So, I mean,
yeah, but for us, it was very obvious that, because I think that the Public Health Agency of Sweden thought that when they stopped the visitors to go into the nursing homes, they would be safe. Turned out it didn't help.
Okay, so should you allow visitors to come in if they take precautions?
No, of course not. I think that you should not visit the old people. It's a short time and it's an easy thing to do to protect our most vulnerable people. You should not go and visit them.
Okay, so why don't you explain a little bit how, like we talked about in the United States, a lot of elderly people live with their families, but that's not the case where you are.
Yeah, the people are staying in their homes too, and you sort of try to, I have a lot of elderly neighbors, for example, and you try to keep out of their faces and you try to keep social distance to them. I think it's rather uncommon that old people stay with the younger generations in Sweden. It's not a society like that. Maybe that was one of the reasons also that why the Somali people were so highly affected, because they actually do stay with their own families in a higher degree, and then they get sick too. But in Sweden, we have this whole system with nursing homes, and people are staying at home by themselves. And all the old people I know is sort of keeping to themselves. I haven't seen my father for, well, since when was it? When did it start? 8 weeks ago now, more?
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know how it is with everyone. I just did from my point of view. And for example, my father is a very sociable guy, and he is very depressed about being isolated. He's always been a big part of our lives. He's always here taking care of my kids. And now he's completely isolated in his elderly care home, which is, well, it's not even an elderly care home, it's just a lot of old people. And I think that after this is over, we're going to see a lot of depressed old people.
Well, in the United States, there are a lot of people, just a lot of college students and stuff like that who are people in their 20s and 30s who live alone, and they're kind of depressed about it because they're not with people either. I mean, it's a great, there's been a rise in alcoholism. Well, alcohol is considered an essential service, so alcohol stores have been open.
I read about that.
Gun sales have gone up tremendously because people, I guess the fear there's going to be riots in the street one day. And our president tries to deflect this, saying, well, we should open up our you got to open up because there's going to be, suicides, there's going to be alcoholism, there's going to be, mental health problems. In the city of New York now, you can call a therapist for free through the New York City government. So I think
That's probably a good thing, yeah.
yeah, well, I think it's also, even if you're not sick, even if you're not elderly, it's still a strain, it's always, it's the elephant in the room. It's always, the pandemic is here. I went out to mail a letter. I forgot to wear my mask, and I said, oh my, and it's like, I hate thinking like that. Like, so are people okay, so we have a phenomenon here where people are told, if they get a package, don't touch the package, just bring it upstairs. Don't touch it for 24 hours. Let the virus die on it. You get your mail, don't touch it for 24 hours. They wash their plastic bags coming, from the grocery store. They wash their fruit, some people soak things down. I don't do all of that. I think that's a little bit too much, but I think but is there anything like that going on?
I think it's the same, that some people are worried and do things like that. I think the information that we get from the government and from the health agency is that really it's very difficult. The virus is spread through respiratory droplets, I think the word is in English. And it's very hard to spread it by, well, it can be spread by a metal, for example, but through a package, it hardly survives in that at all. You have to be very unfortunate to get infected by your mail, for example. So I think most people are not that afraid of things like that. But grocery stores, for example, I think the elderly should keep out of them, and a lot of people are doing that too.
Okay.
Same everywhere in the world. Some people are more worried than others, and some people have a reason to be also.
In the United States, we have a lot of small businesses that are failing. We have, nail salons, all these things, that people had. Yoga teachers, Pilates studios, all these things are shut. Gyms are shut.
That is the difference, though, because we keep our gyms open.
Okay.
And my husband and I was arguing about if we should let our son, who's actually back from the United States now, if he should go to his gym or not. Because I personally believe that it's better to go to the gym and keep yourself busy. If you're a young person and you don't have any risks like affected lungs or asthma or anything like that, then it's better for him to keep healthy and go to the gym, because the gyms are open. And then if you're elderly, you should stay out of them because you might be infected at the gym. But the benefits outweighs the risks, I would say, at least for my son, who's a young and strong boy.
You could also have him move furniture and vacuum the house and do things like that too.
I wish he would do that instead.
Well, he's getting free rent, so.
But a lot of people are staying out of gyms, even if they are open. Elderly.
So, up in the United States, we have like unemployment, because restaurants, restaurants can't operate at full capacity. And so the things I love about I live in Manhattan, New York City. Broadway shows are closed, movie theaters are closed, museums are closed. And so a lot of people are rethinking, just as Stockholm has the most cases, a lot of people are thinking, should I be living in a big city? And do you ever think about that?
Not really, because we have the best hospitals as well. Okay. So I was born by the Finnish border, by the Arctic Circle, and my mom died because she didn't make it to the hospital in time. For me, the biggest risk is to be too far away from a big hospital. That's just a personal reflection. I think that if you should be sick in COVID, then you should be that close to Karolinska or any of the big university hospitals, because they have the best staff and the best way to keep you alive.
Okay, so I'm just seeing if there's any more questions. All right. So, all right, so what would you, okay, so I guess we can end pretty soon. What would you like people to understand about Sweden and this experiment? Do you view it as an experiment, or do you view it as just what other countries should be doing?
I think that every country should sort of do what works for their citizens. I think that maybe if you decided that the lockout was over, maybe everyone would run out to their parks and start not keeping the social distance, then it wouldn't work for you. But for us, it seemed to be working to voluntarily keep our social distance. I wish that we would have been able to protect our elderly better. But except from that, I think the Swedish way seems to be working. But on the other hand, as I keep saying, it's not that different from what you're doing. People are voluntarily trying to contain the disease and contain the virus spread. And I think maybe that is the biggest misconception that we don't care, but we do.
Okay. Well, on that end, I'm glad we can end. And I want to thank Malin Attefall, who's from Swedish public television. I can't pronounce the name very well, but she's a great reporter, a good friend. And I also want to thank my co-chair, Joe Bonner, for being behind the scenes and making sure we got connected, and we did a few rehearsals, and I didn't lose Wi-Fi. And thanks, and we'll be doing more of these in the future, so keep tuned. Thank you so much. Stay safe, enjoy. Ask your son maybe to do some cleaning, and we'll talk soon. Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay.